In 1853, excavators working the ruins of Ashurbanipal's library at Nineveh pulled a tablet from the rubble that had been filed deliberately, not thrown into a storage pile. Shelved, organized, protected. When scholars finally translated it, they found it was the 12th tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the one most translations leave out, the one that doesn't fit the clean philosophical ending of the other 11. It contains a dialogue. Gilgamesh asks his companion Enkidu, who has just returned from the underworld, a simple question. Tell me, my friend. Tell me what you saw. What Enkidu tells him is not a vision, not a metaphor, not a religious comfort. It is a report. A specific, structured, step-by-step description of what happens to a person after they die, what the consciousness experiences, what determines the conditions of that experience, what the underworld looks like from the inside, described by someone who was there and came back. The Sumerians wrote this down 4,000 years ago, and when you read it alongside 4 other tablets that describe the same journey from different angles, a picture emerges that should not be possible for a civilization writing in 2000 BC. Because it matches. In specific, structural, technical ways that ancient people had no framework to imagine and no reason to invent. This is the journey, step by step, exactly as the tablets describe it. Before the journey can be understood, you need to understand what the Sumerians believed was doing the traveling. They had a precise answer, not theological. Structural, at death, the tablets say, the human being splits. The Ada is the body, the clay shell. When the breath leaves, the Ada becomes what the tablets call a pagaru, an empty cadaver. The body of clay returns to clay, exactly as the tablets say it was made. The Gidam is different. The Gidam is the first recorded use of a word for a spirit that survives the body. The earliest known cuneiform character for it dates to the early 3rd millennium BC, before the Epic of Gilgamesh, before Inanna's descent, before any of the major literary texts. It is inscribed on a tablet containing almost nothing else, just that word, as if whoever wrote it was establishing a fact before anything else. The Gidim carries the memory, the personality, the intelligence of the person who died. It is fully self-aware. The tablets are consistent on this across dozens of separate texts from multiple dig sites. The Gidim knows who it is. It knows what it has lost. It is conscious and it is mobile. There is also a third element, the Zakik, a word whose root meaning is wind or breeze. The dream soul, the animating force that could leave the body during sleep. At death, the Zakik separates entirely. The thing that made the clay move leaves. So at the moment of death, the body becomes the pagaru. The breath, the Zakik, leaves, and the Gidam, the shaped, conscious, memory-carrying self, begins its journey. That journey has specific stages. Stage 1. The separation. The tablets describe the moment of death with a precision that does not comfort. There is no peaceful dissolving into light. There is a specific, abrupt event. The Sumerian medical text's clinical records, not myths, describe death as the point at which the blood empties or the last breath exhales. After this, the body is the pagaru. The Gidam is separate and mobile. What the Gidam experiences in the first moments, awareness of the body, awareness of the space around it, and something the tablets describe as pulling a directional force it cannot resist. This is not described as frightening. It is described as inevitable. The underworld has a claim on the Gidam established before death, not at death. The land of no return does not begin when you enter it. It begins when you are born. The god who receives the newly dead Gidam at the moment of separation is Nineveh, son of the goddess of healing. Gula, the transition is understood as a medical event, a clinical handoff, not a spiritual ascent, a guided departure. Stage 2. The road. The tablets describe a path to the underworld not metaphorically. A road. Kurnugi, the Sumerian name for the underworld, is sometimes translated as the land of no return. Its literal translation is the land of the road that goes one way only. The road is built into the name. From the death of Ur-Nammu, a text preserved across 9 damaged tablets held in museums in Philadelphia, Istanbul, and Jannah, the road is described as dark. Not emotional darkness, an operational condition. The Giddim travels without light. The road goes west. This is not poetic. West is where the sun goes when it sets. The sun god Utu travels through the underworld at night before rising again in the east. The road the Giddim travels is the same road the sun travels. The underworld is not simply beneath. It is where the sun goes when it cannot be seen, and the Giddim travels on the same route. The road is populated. The tablets describe the newly dead encountering shades of others who have passed before, not comfort. Fact, at the end of the road is a river. Stage 3. The river and the ferryman. The river is called the Huber. To cross it, the Giddim requires a ferryman. The ferryman is named Ur-Shanabi. He predates the Greek Charon by more than 1,000 years. He predates the Egyptian ferryman of the dead. The Sumerian ferryman is the original. What most accounts miss is the specific condition the tablets set for crossing. You cannot cross without being recognized. The condition for crossing is not moral, it is relational. It depends on whether proper burial rites have been performed, whether there are descendants who have made offerings, whether the dead person's name is being maintained in the world of the living. The ability to proceed into the next stage is not determined by what you did while alive. It is determined by what the people you left behind do after you are gone. A Giddim whose family has performed the rites, whose descendants pour libations, whose name is spoken that Giddim crosses easily. A Giddim with no descendants, no offerings, no name being spoken, stuck at the river. Unable to proceed. The tablets describe these stranded Giddim as the most dangerous of all the dead. They come back, not out of malice, out of need. Stage 4. The gate. The underworld has a wall, a gate, and a gatekeeper. His name is Neti. Neti appears in the descent of Inanna, the death of Ur-Nammu, and several other texts, described consistently, formal, operating under rules that apply without exception. When Inanna arrives, Neti does not simply open the gate. He goes to Ereshkigal, receives instruction, and returns to deliver the conditions. The conditions are the ancient rites of the underworld. That phrase appears across multiple tablets and is never modified. Always ancient, existing before the current divine hierarchy. When Inanna asks why she is being stripped at each of the 7 inner gates, Neti gives an answer that has survived intact for 4,000 years. Quiet, Inanna, the ways of the underworld are perfect. They may not be questioned. That is not religious language. That is the language of a fixed operating system. For an ordinary Giddim, the gate is the point where the journey becomes irreversible. The gate opens one way. Once through, the land of no return earns its name. Stage 5. The stripping. Inside the 7 gates, the Giddim loses something at each threshold. The descent of Inanna describes this fully. At each gate, a divine attribute is removed: her crown, her beads, her chest armor, her ring, her rod of power, her garment. 7 gates, 7 strippings. She arrives in Ereshkigal's throne room with nothing. For an ordinary human Giddim, the contents differ. Not divine attributes, the constructed elements of identity, the social role, the status markers, the external self built over a lifetime, the structured attributes that make a being coherent. Continuous, recognizably itself. 7 gates, 7 strippings, 7 layers of constructed identity removed one by one. What survives is the Giddim in its irreducible form. The memory and intelligence that was never made of the social materials now removed. The part of the person that was there before the crown and the armor and the ring. This is what arrives in the throne room of Ereshkigal. Stage 6. Judgment. Ereshkigal is the queen of the great below, she who holds the tablet of the dead. She is not a villain. She is not a punisher. She is an administrator. The Anunnaki in the underworld texts are judges. They sit in her court and evaluate. The word used for what they do is a legal term, the same word the Sumerians used for adjudicating land disputes. This is bureaucratic language. The underworld functions like a court. From Enkidu's report to Gilgamesh in Tablet C, the most precise surviving description of how judgment works, did you see the man who died in battle, his body properly buried? He sits on a cushioned seat and drinks clean water. Did you see the man who died in battle, his body never recovered? His shade is restless. He drinks muddy water and eats scraps. Did you see the man with 7 sons? He sits beside the junior gods in a place of honor. Did you see the man with no heir? He eats a bread loaf hard as brick. Did you see the woman who never gave birth? Like a defective pot, she is cast aside. Did you see the man burned to death, his body turned to smoke? There is no shade at all. He simply is not there. The conditions in the underworld are not determined by whether you were a good person. They are determined by 4 factors: how you died, whether you were properly buried, how many descendants you left, and whether those descendants are maintaining your name. Not virtue, not faith. The specific material and social conditions of your death and your continuation in the memory of the living. This is a completely different model from any afterlife theology that came after it. Stage 7. Assignment. After judgment, the Giddim is assigned a position. After Ur-Nammu presents gifts to the 7 chief gods of the underworld, he is seated on a great dice and assigned to work alongside Gilgamesh, who in the underworld has become one of the judges of the dead. For everyone else, those with 7 sons sit among the junior gods. Those with no heir eat dry clay. Those with no descendants, no offerings, no name being spoken, those Giddim wander. There is nothing in the underworld holding them. The tablets describe them returning to the world of the living, not because they want to be there, but because they have nowhere to be. This is the origin of ghost belief. Not superstition. A systematic description of what happens to consciousness that has been insufficiently maintained. Now here is where the tablets stop being ancient literature and start being something harder to categorize. Near-death experience research as a formal discipline is 50 years old. Thousands of accounts. Multiple large-scale clinical studies, people across every culture, every religion, every era of documented history. The consistent features, separation from the body, movement through a dark passage, a threshold that cannot be crossed without permission, a review of the life, judgment by assembled presences, an assignment. Every one of those features appears in the Sumerian framework. Separation from the body, the Giddim departing the Ada, dark passage, the road going west. Threshold requiring permission, Neti at the gate. Life review, the stripping at 7 gates, constructed identity removed layer by layer. Judgment, the Anunnaki court assessing the arriving pattern. Assignment, a position determined by the specific conditions of arrival. The Sumerians didn't have this problem to solve. They had a model. And the model describes the same sequence. There is one more thing. The part the tablets spend the most time on, and that every popular account underemphasizes. The journey is not sealed. It is responsive. The underworld is described as an ongoing relationship between the living and the dead. The offerings the living pour into the ground reach the dead. The name spoken in the world of the living reverberates in the underworld. The Giddim that is fed by living descendants eats well. The Giddim that is forgotten diminishes. Most afterlife models are closed systems. You die, you go somewhere, conditions are set. The Sumerian model is open. Conditions respond to what happens in the world of the living. Death is not a severance. It is a change of medium. The living and the dead are in relationship. The relationship requires maintenance. This is why the Sumerians buried their dead under the floor of the family home, not out of sentiment, out of architecture. The dead needed to be close enough to receive what the living provided. What the Sumerians built is a map. Step 1, separation. The Giddim departs the body, guided by Ninazu. Step 2, the road, westward, in darkness, toward the river. Step 3, the river. The ferryman Urshanabi, crossing possible only for the properly maintained dead. Step 4, the gate. Neti, the last point of return, irreversible after crossing. Step 5, the stripping. 7 thresholds. 7 removals of constructed identity. Step 6, judgment. The Anunnaki court. Death, burial, descendants, name, not virtue. Conditions, step 7, assignment. A position in the underworld, dynamic, not fixed. Responsive to what the living continue to do. They wrote this map because they believed it was accurate, not because it comforted them. The best outcome it offers is a cushioned seat and clean water beside the junior gods. That is the best outcome. They wrote it because they believed someone had reported from inside the territory. Enkidu came back. Ur-Nammu's journey was recorded in enough detail to fill 9 tablets, copied across centuries. The tradition of describing the afterlife in specific, technical, step-by-step language was maintained for over 1,000 years. That is not the behavior of people recording a myth for comfort. That is the behavior of people recording a geography they believed was real. There are 2 ways to hold what this video has described. The first is to say the Sumerians, like every civilization, were afraid of death and built a framework for understanding what follows. That the specificity of the map is evidence of cultural transmission, the same story refined across centuries. This is a reasonable position. It doesn't require any claims about the actual nature of consciousness after death, but it requires you to explain the convergence with modern ND documentation. The separation. The dark passage. The threshold requiring permission. The stripping of identity. The judgment, the assignment, the ongoing responsiveness. These are not features of every civilization's afterlife mythology. They are features of the Sumerian model specifically. And they are exactly what trained clinicians find consistently across thousands of accounts from people with no shared cultural framework. The second thing you can do is sit with the map itself, the Giddim carrying your memory and personality, departing the body at the moment the breath leaves, the road going west in darkness toward the river, the ferryman who cannot take you across unless someone is still speaking your name, the gate that opens one way, the 7 strippings of everything constructed, the court that assesses not your virtue but your conditions, the position that is not fixed but responsive. The Sumerians were not describing what they hoped would happen. They were describing what they believed they knew. They wrote it on clay because clay survives. It survived. You are watching it now. What you do with it from here is the whole story.